During a camping trip, I accidentally ate some undercooked mushrooms and ended up with hallucinations. I saw myself playing hide-and-seek with a group of ridiculously handsome men, before being rushed to the ER. The young and dashing attending physician spoke gently. "Tell me, what did you see?" Without hesitation, I threw my arms around his waist, giggling like a fool. "Gotcha. Darling, you look just like my husband." He curved his lips into a charming smile. "Oh? You're married? Then you really shouldn't be hugging me." Completely captivated, I grinned stupidly. "Don't worry. I'll divorce him right away and marry you." When I woke up again and realized what I had done, I wanted to disappear. The handsome doctor's expression was calm as he asked, "So, did your husband agree to the divorce?" Emergency room. Lily, my best friend, sighed as she explained, "I'm so sorry, Anders. She ate some undercooked mushrooms while we were camping and got poisoned. Now she's like this." Completely oblivious to the chaos I'd caused, I was still lost in my hallucination, gleefully playing hide-and-seek with a lineup of gorgeous men. Until a soft, gentle voice pulled me back. "Sherry, tell me, what did you see?" I stared at him for a moment, as if on autopilot, before tuning out his words and throwing myself into his arms. "Gotcha." Lily pinched the bridge of her nose. "Sherry, maybe take a second to see who you're hugging." I looked up at the man's stunningly handsome face, tilting my head in confusion. "Huh? Babe, you look just like my husband." I reached out and gave his rock-hard abs a good squeeze, my voice dripping with admiration. "Wow, your abs are so solid. They feel amazing." The man blinked, then let out a dazzling smile. "Really? But if you already have a husband, you shouldn't be hugging me." Utterly bewitched by his smile, I waved dismissively. "Don't worry. I'll divorce him and marry you instead." Lily couldn't take it anymore. "Anders, just take care of her. And don't take anything she says seriously. I'm leaving now." As she turned to leave, I grabbed her by the arm and pressed a finger to her lips. "Lily, don't go. There are more hotties around here. One of them isn't even wearing a shirt, he's totally your type. Stay here, I'll go find him for you." Lily gave me a long-suffering look, sighed, and left with a whispered, "Good luck." Unbothered, I went back to my game, pretending to chase my imaginary dream guys. Before I could throw myself into the air again, a pair of strong arms caught me. "You little troublemaker. Am I not enough for you?" I pouted, ready to argue, but stopped when I saw his elegant, handsome face. Instead, I cooed indulgently, all right. You're all I need." "Oh no, why do I feel like I'm gonna puke?" He let out a soft sigh, his voice soothing like he was comforting a child. "Be good. Let's get your stomach pumped." I glared at him, rebellious. "Stomach pump? No way. Let's take a bath instead. You go first, I'll wait for you in bed. Behave, or you'll feel worse later." "Fine. But promise me, when this is over, you'll let me do whatever I want with you." "Deal." By the time I regained full consciousness, it was already evening. I stared blankly at the ceiling as the memories from a few hours ago came flooding back like a tidal wave. A minute later, I closed my eyes in quiet resignation. "You're awake? Feeling better?" Pretending to be dead didn't work, so I opened my eyes reluctantly. "Much better." Sitting beside me was my actual husband, Andres, his smile as warm and harmless as ever. "So, when are you planning to tell your husband about us?" His expression was so serious that it sent a jolt through me. Clutching my phone, I pretended to stay calm. "Sorry, I need to call my husband first and ask." Turning my back to him, I quickly dialed Lily for help. As soon as she picked up, I lowered my voice to a desperate whisper. "You traitor! Why didn't you stop me earlier? Come to the hospital and get me out of here, I've embarrassed myself to death." Lily's tone was dripping with schadenfreude. I tried. But who knew that once you got poisoned, you'd go completely off the rails? I couldn't stop you. And, for the record, you said Andres's abs were rock solid. I closed my eyes, utterly defeated. Please, just let me die quietly. Oh, come on, Lily said, amused. It's not a big deal. Your husband always seems so gentle and easygoing, he's got the patience of a saint. Just act cute and pout a little, he'll probably forgive you in no time. I hesitated. Are you sure about that? Trust me. After I hung up, Andres asked lazily, so, did your husband agree to the divorce? His calm demeanor made it seem like he had no idea he was, in fact, my husband. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I prepared to face the music. Come closer, I said. He raised an eyebrow but complied, leaning in until we were mere inches apart. What is it? Without warning, I wrapped my arms around his lean waist and pressed my face into his pristine white coat, rubbing against it like a repentant kitten. Andres, I was wrong. Please don't take what I said earlier to heart, okay? For a moment, there was silence. Then, above me, I heard the soft sound of his laughter. Sherry, he said gently, I'm sorry for not being home much lately. I know it's made you feel lonely. Things at the hospital have been crazy, and I haven't taken care of you like I should. That's on me. He reached out and lightly pinched my cheek, his voice tender. So if you felt that way, it's because I haven't been a good enough husband. I froze, overwhelmed by a rush of emotion I couldn't quite name. Touched. How could someone be so perfect? Who would have thought that such a wonderful man was someone I met through a blind date? And now, we'd only been married for 3 months. A few days later, Andres took 2 days off, claiming it was to nurture our marital bond. He decided we should go on a date. At the restaurant. I stared at Andres with a mournful gaze, complaining, you won't let me eat anything. What kind of date is this? I don't want to be with you anymore. Andres sighed. You just had your stomach pumped. Your digestive system is still fragile and needs light, bland food. Just then, his phone rang. Judging by his expression, it was a call from the hospital. He glanced at me apologetically before answering. Patient in bed 3 is deteriorating? Don't panic, notify Lucy and the others to prepare for surgery. I'll call Dr. Dennis immediately. He stood up as he spoke, pausing briefly to address me. Wait here for a bit. I need to take this call outside. I nodded earnestly. Go ahead. Work is more important. No sooner had Andres stepped away than a familiar voice rang out from nearby. He already came to have dinner with you. Don't push your luck. I turned toward the source and saw Jack, his chiseled profile as cold and unapproachable as ever. His sharp, almost predatory features were made even harsher by the impatience etched into his expression. He glanced at his watch, ignoring the girl clinging to his arm. His tone was as merciless as ever. Could you back off, sweetheart? You're standing too close. If not for his frosty demeanor, the two of them, him, a striking man, and her, a beautiful woman, would have made a picture-perfect couple. Too bad Jack still hadn't learned how to love someone properly. A few less than pleasant memories flickered through my mind, making my chest ache faintly. I sighed, ready to look away and pretend I hadn't seen him. But he must have sensed my gaze, because his eyes locked onto mine. A flash of panic crossed his face before he abruptly shook off the girl clinging to him and strode toward me. Sherry, he demanded, his voice low and tense. What are you doing here? Isn't this a couple's restaurant? As if realizing something, his hand shot out to grab my wrist, his expression darkening. Who are you here with? His grip was uncomfortably tight, and I winced. Let go, I said coldly. It's none of your business. Need I remind you? We're no longer together. Behind him, the girl, clearly distressed, murmured softly, Jack, don't be like this. Jack ignored her completely. His focus was entirely on me, his grip tightening as though he wouldn't let go until I answered. Thankfully, Andres returned just then. Taking in the scene, he wasted no time crossing the room and intervening. As a doctor, he clearly knew exactly where to apply pressure to make someone release their grip without causing harm. Jack grunted and let go of my wrist. Without sparing Jack a glance, Andres gently raised my hand, inspecting the red marks left behind. His eyes darkened with concern. "Does it hurt?" Something about his calm, soothing presence steadied my nerves. I shook my head. "Don't worry. It doesn't hurt much, it'll be fine soon." Jack, clearly provoked by the exchange, glared at us with a stormy expression. His voice was laced with barely restrained anger as he spat, "Sherry, who is this?" Only then did Andres finally look directly at him. Andres rarely showed anger, but now his expression was icy, his green eyes dark and foreboding. His voice was calm but taut, barely containing the fury underneath. "This gentleman just tried to manhandle my wife in front of everyone. Don't you think you owe me an explanation?" Jack froze, visibly stunned. It took him several moments to process what he had just heard. "No, impossible," he finally stammered. "She's just mad that I haven't reached out to her in so long. She's lying to make me jealous." His gaze shifted back to me, desperate, searching my eyes, as though clinging to the hope that I'd deny Andres' words. A whirlwind of thoughts swirled in my head. Finally, I let out a slow breath, stepped closer to Andres, and slipped my arm through his, leaning on him with deliberate intimacy. "Darling," I said with a radiant smile, "weren't we planning to head to the hospital for my prenatal checkup after dinner? Let's go." The statement sent shockwaves through the group. Andres's barely contained anger softened almost immediately. He glanced at my stomach and, without missing a beat, adopted his usual gentle demeanor. "Of course. Let's not keep the doctor waiting." Jack's expression twisted with disbelief. His eyes darted to the table, where the plain but nutritious food still sat, completely unlike the spicy dishes I usually favored. He knew my preferences well enough to understand what the change might mean. I met Jack's defeated gaze with calm detachment before turning away, still holding onto Andres' arm, and walking out without looking back. Once outside, Andres didn't ask any questions. His expression was as serene as if nothing unusual had happened. "Still hungry? Should we find another place to eat?" The more composed he seemed, the more anxious I felt. I looked up at him nervously. "Andres, aren't you curious about what just happened?" After all, our quiet dinner had been disrupted out of nowhere, and from his perspective, the man who barged in clearly had a complicated history with his wife. Andres was silent for a moment before he sighed softly. "Of course I am." He leaned down slightly so that we were at eye level, his green eyes warm and steady as they met mine. "But my wife already seems upset. I don't want to bring up unpleasant things that might ruin her mood." He smiled gently. "Besides, today is our date. Why waste our time on people who don't matter?" His words left me momentarily speechless. I couldn't deny that Jack's sudden appearance had rattled me. Though I thought I had hidden my unease well, Andres had clearly noticed. Somehow, his words eased the restlessness in my heart. The frustration that had been building up inside me began to melt away. I tugged at the hem of his shirt, feeling both guilty and bashful. "All right, if you really want to know, just ask." Andres chuckled softly, the corners of his lips curling into a tender smile. He didn't press the issue, though. Instead, he gently took my wrist in his hand. "Let's go, Mrs. Cooper. We still have plenty of time to enjoy our date." Later, we went to see the romance movie I had been looking forward to for weeks. Andres watched intently, his focus on the screen unwavering. It was only when he noticed me sneaking glances at him that he turned to me with a soft smile and whispered, "What's wrong?" The contrast struck me. When I used to watch movies with Jack, he'd almost always be disinterested, scrolling through his phone or, worse, using the darkness as an opportunity to misbehave. "You always pick the most boring movies," he'd complain, his tone laced with irritation. Andres was different from Jack in so many ways. When the movie ended, and I excitedly launched into a spirited analysis of the plot, Andres didn't interrupt or dampen my enthusiasm. He just listened attentively, responding with thoughtful comments that made me feel truly heard. My mood brightened even more. Without realizing it, I reached out to take his hand. Come on. Let's head to 27th Street later. There's a place there with amazing Mexican tacos. He let me hold his hand, gently interlacing his fingers with mine, the corners of his lips curving into a soft, amused smile. Have you forgotten you're supposed to avoid spicy food right now? Before I could pout, he added with a mischievous glint in his eyes, but don't worry. I watched, stunned, as he used that gentle, handsome face to deliver a playful blow. If you're really craving it, I can eat them for you while you watch. Meeting my indignant glare, he chuckled softly. So, have you learned your lesson about eating undercooked food yet? I immediately straightened up, pretending to be busy observing something else. Oh wow, look over there. That couple's practically glued together. The air between us stilled for a moment. Embarrassment hit me like a freight train. What am I even saying? Andres's lips twitched as though suppressing laughter. His tone was laced with mock hesitation as he replied, if you want us to do things like that, maybe we should wait until we're home. Wait, what? That's not what I meant at all. Before I could stammer out an explanation, he smiled slyly. What were you thinking? I just meant if they can't control themselves, they should save it for home. How is it possible for someone with such a kind, innocent-looking face to say things that make me want to bury myself alive? After a day of fun, I couldn't resist dozing off in the car on our way home. The car moved at a steady, soothing pace, lulling me into a deep sleep. I drifted into a long and blissful dream, only to be gently roused by a warm, familiar voice. Sherry, we're home. I frowned slightly, unwilling to wake up. With a soft sigh, I felt myself being scooped up into a strong, warm embrace. His scent, clean, comforting, and distinctly him, washed over me, and without thinking, I nestled closer, adjusting into a comfortable position against his shoulder and falling into an even deeper sleep. It was an unconscious display of trust, one I hadn't even realized I had for him. Half asleep, I vaguely felt the brush of warm lips against the corner of mine, fleeting but tender. Sweet dreams, love, he whispered. After that day, neither Andres nor I brought up Jack again. With Andres' sharp intuition, I had no doubt he had pieced together the nature of my past with Jack. But he chose not to mention it, likely because he deemed Jack irrelevant and unworthy of our time. I had no intention of revisiting the subject either. Why dredge up something that could sow discord in an otherwise happy marriage? Just as I was about to mentally file Jack away as nothing more than a distant memory, an unfamiliar number lit up my phone screen. When I answered, a hoarse voice came through the line. Sherry, we need to talk. A few days later, I agreed to meet Jack. It had been a while since I'd seen him, but the changes in him were striking. His bloodshot eyes, the gaunt lines of his face, he looked like someone who hadn't slept or eaten properly in days. But despite his haggard appearance, I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret. Just an empty detachment. What is it you wanted to say? I asked, my voice calm. Jack's gaze bore into mine, as if searching for even the smallest trace of compassion. It was a long time before he finally spoke, his voice raw. Sherry, let's get back together. I frowned deeply. Have you forgotten that I'm already married? And you have a new girlfriend yourself. Don't you find it ridiculous to be saying things like this? Jack's face fell into a state of despair. No, it's not like that. When we broke up, I sent you so many messages apologizing, but you never responded. Out of anger, I got involved with someone else, trying to prove that I didn't need you. But I was wrong, so wrong. I can't live without you. His voice grew more urgent as he added, I know you and that man only met through a blind date. There's no real love between you two. And the story about the baby, that was fake, wasn't it? You only said that to spite me, right? Divorce him, Sherry. Let's go back to how things used to be. I stepped back, avoiding his outstretched hand, and let out a humorless laugh. You've been investigating me? Jack's voice was hoarse. Sherry, I just couldn't let it end like this. I exhaled slowly, steadying my emotions. Over something so petty? How many times have I tried to explain things to you? What more do you want from me? Enough is enough. I've already admitted I made mistakes, what more do you want? I fixed him with a cold stare. This is your so-called apology? A half-hearted "I was wrong," laced with accusations that I'm overreacting? Why do you think such an insincere apology deserves forgiveness? I stepped forward, my tone unwavering. As for my marriage, it's something Andres and I decided on after careful consideration. The pregnancy story was a lie to make you give up, yes. But just because we don't have a child now, doesn't mean we won't in the future. I looked him squarely in the eye. Unlike you, Jack, I don't gamble with someone else's feelings. I don't betray others on a whim. You're so self-centered, and frankly, I've outgrown your childishness. Jack's expression crumbled, pain flashing in his eyes. Stop, don't say any more. Before I could react, he yanked me into a crushing embrace, his arms wrapping around me like steel bands. Sherry, let's not fight anymore, okay? He rested his head on my shoulder, his grip so tight it felt as though he wanted to fuse me into his bones. I was wrong. I really, truly was wrong. Summoning all my strength, I shoved him away and delivered a stinging slap across his face. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out a necklace and threw it to the ground. I came here today for 2 reasons, I said coldly. First, to make it clear that you need to stop interfering in my life. And second, to return this necklace to you. A red handprint bloomed on his cheek, but he seemed oblivious to the pain. His eyes fixated on the necklace now lying broken on the ground. Slowly, with trembling hands, he picked it up. It was the star-shaped necklace he had given me the day I accepted his confession, engraved with both our initials, a symbol of his promise that we would always be together. Now, the chain was broken. The last flicker of hope in Jack's eyes seemed to extinguish as he cradled the shattered necklace in his hands. I watched him quietly, detached, before turning to leave. Over my shoulder, I spoke in a voice devoid of warmth. If I had known this meeting would be such a waste of time, I would have thrown that necklace in the trash to begin with. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Andres these past 2 days. He wasn't his usual calm, composed self, he seemed unhappy. As his wife, I couldn't just ignore it. Andres, is something bothering you at work? If there's anything upsetting you, don't keep it to yourself. Talk to me about it, I urged, my concern plain in my voice. He reached out to pinch my cheek, his smile soft and reassuring. Don't worry. Maybe I'm just a little tired from work. I'll be fine after some rest. But I knew better. This wasn't just work fatigue. Andres clearly had something on his mind, something he wasn't telling me. While I was brainstorming ways to get him to open up, that evening, he came home smelling of alcohol, supported by one of his colleagues. How much did he drink? I asked, half worried, half angry. His coworker and friend let out a helpless sigh. Didn't he tell you? The hospital director has been trying to pair him up with his daughter for ages. When he found out Andres quietly got married, it really pissed him off. Tonight, he finally had the chance and made sure to get him thoroughly drunk. He added, chuckling incredulously, honestly, it's strange. Andres seems so easygoing, but he's not the type to take things lying down. And yet, tonight, he let himself be treated like a pushover, drinking every glass they gave him without complaint. I was both heartbroken and furious. After seeing his colleague off, I turned to Andres with a stern look. That was foolish of you. Next time something like this happens, don't let them push you around. Do you hear me? Drunk Andres was surprisingly quiet. So quiet that, if not for the slightly dazed look in his eyes, I wouldn't have guessed he'd been drinking. At my scolding, he blinked slowly, his long black lashes fluttering, before murmuring softly, okay. Something in my heart melted. This version of Andres was unbearably adorable. With his naturally fair skin, the flush brought on by alcohol only made him more striking. His half-lidded eyes and long lashes cast delicate shadows over his flushed cheeks, making him look like a docile kitten. Unable to resist, I gave in to a playful impulse and began pinching his cheeks, molding his handsome face into various silly shapes. He let me have my way for a while, before finally catching my hands and pulling me into his arms. Burying his face into the crook of my neck, his voice came muffled, laced with both complaint and vulnerability. "You can't do this. You can't keep taking advantage of the fact that I like you to bully me." The warm breath against my neck sent tingles down my spine. Pressing a hand against the flutter in my chest, I laughed softly. "How am I bullying you?" He didn't seem to hear me, or maybe he chose to ignore the question. In a low voice, he continued, "You're a married woman. How could you? How could you hug another man besides me?" I blinked in confusion. "What?" His hold tightened slightly, as if he'd remembered something unpleasant. "That man. Do you still have feelings for him?" "I saw it. That necklace with both your names engraved on it. You still kept it." His words hit me like a bolt out of the blue. "And that day?" His voice trembled slightly, as though reliving the memory pained him. "He hurt you." I was so angry, but why? "Why did you stop me?" I froze, stunned as his words spilled out, fueled by the alcohol. All the things he'd been keeping to himself, all his doubts and frustrations, came tumbling out, and I found myself at a loss for words. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts as I pieced together everything he had been bottling up. After a long silence, I felt a cool, damp sensation against my neck as Andres murmured, his voice low and pained. "Can you just treat me a little better too?" The next morning, I woke to find myself locking eyes with a wide-awake, and clearly mortified, Andres. For the first time, I saw something akin to embarrassment on his usually composed face. It seemed like he was replaying the events of the previous night in his mind, because after a brief pause, he pressed his lips together and said, "I'm sorry for losing control last night." I stared into his striking eyes, noticing emotions I couldn't quite decipher. "You said something yesterday when you were drunk," I began, my voice calm. "Something about me hugging another man. The more I think about it, the only time that could have happened was when I met him." "What exactly did you see? Or rather, what had he misunderstood?" Andres froze ever so slightly, clearly not expecting me to bring the subject out into the open so directly. He lowered his gaze, his long lashes trembling faintly as he spoke in a quiet voice. "The day you met him. I was there too." I blinked in surprise, waiting for him to continue. "He approached me first. Said he had something to discuss about you. But by the time I arrived, I saw you two, hugging." His voice faltered, hesitation creeping in. I wanted to go over and punch him right then and there, but I stopped myself. "I thought, if you..." He trailed off, as if the words were too painful to say aloud. Finally, he whispered, "If you really didn't want me anymore, then at least I could leave with some dignity. I didn't want to make things harder for you." Something unnameable welled up in my chest, a bittersweet mix of emotions I couldn't quite untangle. "So you just left," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "You let your wife get hugged by another man without stepping in?" Drawing from recent experience, I naturally reached out and aggressively pinched and twisted his handsome face in mock anger. "Coward! If you'd stayed just 2 more minutes, you wouldn't have jumped to such ridiculous conclusions. You didn't even see me slap him across the face." "What hug? He forced me into that." I didn't stop, my frustration spilling out. "The only reason I agreed to meet him was to return that stupid necklace he gave me and draw a clear line between us. If I'd known it would cause so many misunderstandings, I would have tossed it in the trash in front of you from the start." "Andres," I continued, my voice softening, "I don't have feelings for him anymore. And on our date that day, I stopped you from hitting him because he's not worth it. Pretending I was pregnant was just to make sure he gave up and left us alone. It wasn't about making you jealous or anything like that." Andres stood frozen, a flicker of shock and vulnerability crossing his face. I couldn't help but laugh as I looked at him, the corners of my eyes crinkling with amusement. What's wrong with you, Andres? You're usually so smart, but when it comes to stuff like this, you're so clueless. I paused, my tone softening with sincerity. But to be fair, I'm partly to blame too. I should have explained things to you earlier, instead of letting you misunderstand. In response, he pulled me into an embrace so sudden it caught me off guard. Sherry, he murmured against my hair, his voice filled with a vulnerability that tugged at my heart. Does the fact that you're explaining all of this to me mean you care about me, even just a little? I wrapped my arms around his lean waist, pressing close as I corrected him with a gentle smile. Not just a little. I care about you a lot. As summer break drew to a close, the children were gearing up to return to school. As a preschool teacher, it meant my carefree days were numbered, and soon I'd be thrown back into the whirlwind of work. Andres glanced at the clock and sighed. It's late. You should get some rest. I shook my head dramatically, my face full of mock despair. I can't sleep. The thought of going back to work is too much. After a moment of contemplation, I slid onto his lap. Since that day, our relationship had grown much closer, and these intimate gestures had become natural, something I did without a second thought. Grabbing his long, elegant hand, I placed it over my heart. I've been feeling tightness in my chest these past few days, shortness of breath, and insomnia. Dr. Cooper, you need to check if I have a serious, very serious condition. I paused, then added with an innocent tone, you know, one that requires at least 2 months off to recover. Andres humored me, letting his hand stay where I'd placed it. With a slight smile, he feigned a thoughtful diagnosis. Work anxiety disorder. I gasped theatrically. And how do we treat that? Should I delay going back to work? Before I could finish, he leaned in, cutting me off with a soft laugh and a brief kiss at the corner of my lips. One way is to distract yourself, he said, his tone low and teasing. My mind went blank, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. Well? Feeling any better? Before I could respond, he kissed me again, this time just a little deeper. And now? I snapped out of my daze and glared at him. Not enough. Like this. Without waiting for a reply, I leaned in boldly and captured his lips. Andres froze, clearly startled by my sudden audacity, but he didn't resist, letting me take charge as I kissed him with abandon. When I finally decided I'd had enough and began to pull away, he caught me by the waist and returned the kiss, slow and deliberate. The temperature between us rose steadily, the air thick with a growing tension. I wasn't sure who started it, but soon our touches moved beyond the kiss, growing bolder and more heated. Just as I was about to lose myself completely, Andres abruptly pulled away. The abruptness left me dazed, almost as if the passion moments earlier had been entirely one-sided. I stared at his flushed face, which had grown even more alluring under the haze of desire. Andres, for all his calm demeanor, clearly wasn't unaffected. His body told a different story, even if his restraint prevailed. Leaning down, he gave me a gentle peck on the lips and said softly, "It's late. You should rest." Then, as if nothing had happened, he stood up and headed toward the bathroom. Watching him leave, I couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Who else stays in the just talking in bed phase after 6 months of marriage? If Lily ever found out, she'd never let me live it down. I could already imagine her teasing. You've got such a gorgeous husband, and you haven't made a move? What's wrong with you? No way. I reached out and grabbed Andres before he could escape, pulling him back down onto the bed beneath me. Dr. Cooper, how can you leave when the treatment isn't finished? Before he could answer, my hand slid to his well-defined abs, exploring the firm muscles under my fingers and daring to venture lower. Andres let out a strained groan, quickly catching my wandering hand. Stop playing, or I won't be able to hold back anymore. His voice was rough with restraint, and his usually clear green eyes were misted with heat, tinged red at the corners. He was breathtaking, even more so than usual. For a brief moment, I couldn't help but think of that night when he'd nestled into my arms, drunk and endearingly vulnerable. My hands grew increasingly daring as I boldly declared, "Don't move. Tonight, I'm going to make you cry like a baby." André stopped resisting. His thick lashes fluttered slightly, veiling the flicker of something dark in his eyes. "Okay. I'm at your mercy." The next morning, I opened my eyes and stared blankly at the ceiling. Andrés leaned over, pressing a gentle kiss to the corner of my lips. His voice was soft and affectionate. "Good morning. I made your favorite pumpkin vegetable soup. Want to get up and have some?" I ignored him. I never expected this. After an entire summer break apart, the first thing my students said when they saw me was, "Miss Sherry, are you having a baby?" They looked up at me with their innocent little faces, and continued seriously, "Your tummy got bigger. When Mommy was pregnant, her tummy looked just like that." Lily, standing nearby, didn't miss the chance to chime in, her tone dripping with amusement. "Kids, Miss Sherry isn't having a baby. She just got a little chubbier over summer break." That hit me hard. Feeling deflated, I turned to vent my frustrations to Andres via text. "It's all your fault. You keep making all these delicious meals, and now the kids are saying I've gained weight." Andres replied with his usual calm reassurance. "You're not fat at all. You've always been beautiful, but before you were too thin. Now you're perfect." I wasn't having it. "Stop sweet-talking me. I've decided, I'm not eating your cooking tonight." Andres responded almost immediately, his message light and nonchalant. "I'm making tomato meat sauce pasta and herb braised steak tonight." Looking at the menu he'd sent, I couldn't resist. Salivating, I replied, "Forget what I said." Later, I took the kids outside for activities. One of them suddenly tugged on my sleeve and whispered, "Miss Sherry, there's a strange man over there watching us." Alarmed, I looked in the direction she pointed but saw nothing. Frowning, I quickly told Lily, who was standing nearby with a thoughtful expression. "Did you see anyone suspicious? What if it's some creep trying to harm the kids?" Lily raised an eyebrow. "Relax. Maybe she just mistook a tree for a person." I decided to let it go, though unease lingered in the back of my mind. By the end of the day, I had safely handed off the last child to their parent. Exhausted, I pulled out my phone and messaged Andres. "So tired. Only a delicious steak dinner can heal my soul right now." His reply came instantly. "Look up." Puzzled, I did as he said. A tall, slender figure came into view, stepping into the golden glow of the setting sun. Surprise and delight lit up my face as I dashed into his arms, my steps light and eager. "What are you doing here?" Andres smiled, his hand reaching up to ruffle my hair. "I came to pick you up from work." Behind me, Lily's voice floated over, dripping with mock exasperation. "I can't watch this anymore. You two are straight out of a romantic drama." I chuckled, turning to wave at her. "See you tomorrow. I'm going home with my husband now." When I turned back, I caught Andres looking off into the distance, his gaze sharp, with an icy glint flickering in his green eyes. "What are you looking at?" I asked, tilting my head. "Nothing." He stepped slightly to the side, deliberately blocking my view, then intertwined his fingers with mine as if nothing had happened. "Let's go. Time to head home." Feeling the warmth of his strong, steady hand in mine, I smiled and nodded. Let's go home."
At 32, Andres had become a prime target for relentless matchmaking. His parents' nagging and the not-so-subtle advances of various women were met with the same calm indifference. He devoted himself wholly to his work, exuding a polite but impenetrable distance when it came to matters of the heart. Until that day. During his routine rounds, Andres discovered that one of his young patients, a 5-year-old girl, had gone missing. The child had grown increasingly withdrawn after her beautiful black hair had been shaved off for treatment. Panicked, Andres led her parents and the nursing staff in a frantic search, dreading what the little girl might have done. Thankfully they found her. She was curled up in the lap of a young woman, quietly listening to a fairy tale being told. It was the first time Andres met Sherry, though it was earlier than Sherry remembered. He stood silently at a distance, watching as she finished the story, her voice gentle and warm. And so, Princess Emily defeated the dragon, broke the witch's curse, and her beautiful hair grew back. But most importantly, her courage and resilience won over everyone's hearts. In the end, she became the new ruler of the kingdom, and they all called her Queen Emily. The little girl's eyes, once dull with sadness, sparkled with a hint of light. "Miss Sherry," she asked softly, "will my hair grow back too?" Sherry's smile lit up her face, her eyes shimmering like a sky full of stars. "Of course it will. That's why you need to eat well, stay strong, and face everything with courage, resilience, and optimism. Only then can you become an unstoppable queen." When Sherry finally noticed Andres, she flashed a playful smile. "All right, my Princess Anna, your knight has come to take you back." That day, the little girl obediently followed Andres back to her room. Unfortunately, Andres had been wearing a mask, and Sherry never got a good look at his face. For the next 2 days, Andres couldn't focus. It felt as though something important was missing, a loose end that refused to be tied. After much hesitation, he decided to follow his heart. For the first time in his career, he used hospital connections to investigate her identity, a decision completely out of character. The result, however, was not what he hoped for. "Oh, that girl? Sorry, there's no record of her here. She came in with her boyfriend." The nurse continued with a chuckle. "I remember them pretty well. Her boyfriend's a racer, I think. Got into an accident while street racing. Thankfully, it was just minor injuries. That girl was furious, said something about breaking up if he did it again." Andres didn't hear the rest. After thanking the nurse, he left quietly and threw himself back into work, his demeanor calm as if nothing had happened. But his closest friend wasn't fooled. Watching Andres work himself into exhaustion, his friend teased, "Poor Dr. Cooper. You're lovesick for someone you don't even know." Time passed. Despite his parents' continued enthusiasm for setting him up on dates, Andres remained steadfast in his solitude. Then one day, his mother sent him another photo of a prospective match. This time, something compelled him to open it. The moment he saw the picture, his heart raced. That day, he finally learned her name. After breaking up with Jack, Sherry went through a prolonged period of emotional turmoil. Her mother, worried about her constant low spirits, began actively scouting for eligible bachelors in the hopes of lifting Sherry's mood. Sherry, thoroughly exasperated and desperate to stop her mother from fussing, pointed randomly at one of the photos her mother had collected. "Him. Let's go with him." It wasn't a completely arbitrary choice, though. Among the options, this man was, objectively, the most handsome. And that's how Sherry and Andres first met, through a blind date orchestrated by their families. Sherry attended the meeting with the intention of just going through the motions. But when they actually started spending time together, she realized something unexpected. It wasn't so bad. In fact, it was surprisingly pleasant. Unlike her initial expectations, there wasn't even a hint of discomfort in their interactions. If anything, being around Andres felt oddly comforting. From that day onward, the two naturally stayed in touch. They began spending time together as friends but claimed to be dating to get their parents off their backs. Everything changed one fateful night. Sherry, finally deciding to leave the past behind, went out drinking with Lily and got thoroughly smashed. Andres rushed to pick her up after receiving a frantic call from Lily, only to find himself at the mercy of a very drunk Sherry. She took full advantage of her inebriated state to shamelessly flirt, teasing him. Word of the incident somehow reached their families. With phrases like, "give her a proper title," and "take responsibility," being thrown around, their engagement was swiftly arranged. By the time Sherry sobered up and realized what had happened, she had already become Mrs. Cooper. But Andres had found a place in Sherry's heart long before she was even aware of it. On one of their dates, as they drove back, Sherry fell asleep in the car and drifted into a long, serene dream. In that dream, there was no Jack. No heartbreak. It was a dream entirely about Andres. When she woke up, a sense of wistful longing lingered, tugging at her heart. She thought to herself, if only I could have met Andres sooner. Much, much sooner. The end.